Hey, how are you? I'm gonna put myself on mute until for a couple minutes, but I'll jump back in a minute.
Uh, are people here? I can't see. Can I?
No one's here yet, just us. I'm in the public space, but no one is here from the public. So
Um, we've had good public in the past. I hope we do again.
yeah, hopefully in my experience, they mostly just join online. So I don't expect anyone in person, but you never know.
Just trying to turn a light on. Uh,
Let's
let's see.
make sure no one's. Oh, there's more people waiting. Oh, it's just me. He's already there. Oh no, that's me. Yeah, he should be.
Um, I am. There was a family medical emergency. I'm not in my usual place. The lighting is adequate here. It's sort of weird.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. But yeah, you look fine. Yeah, looks good. I can see you well.
Checking in. Can you hear me? This is Doug.
Yes.
Okay. And I'm not on video, right?
Right.
Okay. Is that to plan?
I'm sorry, say that again.
Is that your intention?
Oh, I mean, it's up to
Follow the
you.
link that you sent me. So, but I noticed that I have a public interface, not a panelist interface.
Yeah, so the panelists, yes, so that is correct, because the panel should
Okay.
just be us and David, so
Okay, then I will stand by to support David with audio.
awesome.
And do I run the PowerPoint, the slideshow from my computer? Is that correct?
Oh yeah, sorry, I just emailed you back. Would you like me to present it? I'm happy to pull it up on my screen and present it if that
No,
would
there's
help for
no.
you.
It it's slightly easier for me to do it.
Okay, that sounds good.
Um, let's see, the actual panelists of the advisory panel will be pictured or not?
They should be on video camera, yes.
Excuse me, Jillian.
Yes.
Right now your video feed is labeled LWDA CA. Might want to adjust that to list your name for everyone to know who you are.
Well, I'll introduce myself, but I have to be on it from this one because that is how we're hosting the meeting.
Okay.
But thank you.
You can change the name if you want to include both LWDACA
Yeah.
dash Jillian.
That would be a help to the public who are participating.
All right, I'll do that. There we go.
Perfect. Thank you.
Oh.
How are you all? Oh, I guess I better take my jean jacket off my chair.
Hello, how are you?
I'm well, thank you. And yourselves?
Good.
Good. All right. Oh, I have you on two screens here.
Hmm.
There we go. All right. How is everyone today? Come on, you guys.
Great.
Yay! I appreciate this energy for
This
getting
is important stuff. This is hard. You know, it's hard to get the lift started, but important stuff. I can't hear you. If you are you speaking, Jillian?
Yeah, I'm just talking to to Colton, who's sitting next to me.
Hi.
Oh,
I was just telling him I'm just keep refreshing my emails, waiting for the inevitable. Where's the Zoom link?
And I was telling you, whenever I do these type of meetings, that's when it happens, like 2:02 or 2:03, people are like, my link doesn't work, and it's like,
Yeah.
I'm trying to run the meeting. Sorry. I can't.
okay. Well, I'll be the first to admit I clicked the wrong link. And I went in as a general public, and then I
Oh,
thought,
did you?
I did remember seeing something. So I went back and searched my inbox, and lo,
There was.
It's the worst thing to see, though, is a whole bunch of emails of, I can't get into Teams.
Should I unblur?
And just remind me, just so that I make sure that I'm in order. I'll call the meeting to order. I'll do the roll call. Then we'll do the action to approve the minutes. And I'm just going to will you keep time for them to read and digest the minutes before I ask for a motion to approve them? I don't remember. It's been last week.
Yeah, typically we expect that they've already read them.
Yeah,
but if not, we can ask if they need a minute. We're gonna have a small meeting today because I believe Jessica Pitt will be out of attendance, and so will Denise.
Ah, okay.
So we still have a quorum, but not everyone will be here today. So
Okay. 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 All right.
let's see, at some point I'll want to share screen host. Can you enable that, please?
yes, yes, we can make that happen. One moment.
Well, this says you're a panelist. Can you believe my autocorrect misspells your name, Jillian? That must happen to you a lot.
It does, and it's okay, it doesn't bother me. So, David, do you have the option at the bottom of your screen that says share screen?
And it says host disabled participant screen sharing.
Okay. Let me troubleshoot that.
There's usually for the host, it says you're a participant, but if you're host, there's usually a little sidebar up arrow next to share screen.
Okay. Let's try to fix that. Okay, David, does it look like you can do it now?
Perfect.
Okay, great.
I'm going to share screen for 5 seconds. Okay.
Cool.
Hello, Ray.
Hi, nice to see you.
Hi, Ray.
Hey.
How you doing? I dig that shirt.
Oh, thank you.
Ah. It's 3:01. How long do we want to wait before we rock and roll?
I believe we need one more panelist for quorum. So I think Maria would be the only person we're waiting on.
Okay.
Make sure she's not in the other. Yeah, she's not. Okay. So let's give her maybe like 5 minutes,
Sure. Sure.
and then I'll reach out. I'll reach out to make sure she remembers.
Yeah. No rush. Just checking. Make sure I'm on point. Oh, it looks like Maria is in the attendee pool.
Yes, I'm gonna ask our host to give her panelists.
Lisa, you're the one who keeps us out of prison. We are very grateful for your assistance.
There's generally very little risk of criminal prosecution related to these things.
Open meeting laws.
Am I, can you guys see me or am I'm not sure if I'm just unmuted for, okay. As long as you can mute me and unmute me, as long as I'm able to communicate with y'all.
All right, welcome, Maria.
Sorry about that.
No worries. I think at least two of us did that.
I think we have everyone here, so I think we can get started.
Okay, awesome. Thank you, Jillian. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our Labor and Workforce Development Agency, AB 2849 Worker Ownership Study Panel Meeting. Today is March 20th, and I think let's start. This meeting is officially called to order. And let's start with roll call. Member Pitt, I believe, did we know she's not here, correct?
Mhm.
So Member Chris Sotelo,
Here, hi.
Member Tagade, absent as well, right? And Member Salinas.
Here.
Awesome. Okay, our first item up on the agenda is to approve the agenda. If you all will take just a moment to review the agenda if you haven't already. And once everyone's read it, we can have a motion to approve.
So moved.
Thank you, Member Salinas. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Member Crisatello. So we have a motion to approve the March panel meeting agenda. Any discussion over the agenda before we call for the vote? Okay, hearing no discussion. How do the members vote? Ayes?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Nays? Hearing none? The motion passes to accept the March meeting agenda. Our next action item is to approve the December meeting minutes. And give you all a moment, if you have not read them, to maybe give a quick skim, refresh your memory. And if everyone has read them, could we have a motion to accept the December meeting minutes?
So moved.
Thank you, Member Salinas. A second.
Second.
Thank you, Member Crisatello. Any discussion on the December meeting minutes? Hearing no discussion, we'll call for the vote to approve the December meeting minutes. Ayes?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any nays? Hearing none, the motion passes to approve the December meeting minutes. Next up on our agenda is an update from PI. I believe, Dr. Levine, do you need sharing rights for?
I have them. Thank you.
Oh, very good. Then, sir, you have the floor.
So about 200 years ago, capitalism was pretty new and the first worker co-ops were established. And if you discussed them back then, it would sound really familiar. The idea was that traditional ownership doesn't create good jobs for workers, and that workers needed a chance to have more democracy at work and more respect at work. This discussion's been going on for centuries, and we thought we'd see what we can learn that might apply to California. So I normally present one paper at a time. This is obviously a whole book-length project. So I will be going rather quickly. I'm really happy to take questions, but this is just a snapshot of where we are. Everything I say is very tentative. And I will sometimes say we, and just to say the we is a big team. And this is researchers, including some who are truly the leaders in understanding employee ownership in the United States and around the world, as well as graduate students who are just getting started in this field. The first question we asked was to look at the effects of worker ownership, and there have been hundreds of articles, many review articles. What we're trying to focus on is what can we say about traditionally disadvantaged workers, where the labor market has not been very kind in most segments of the labor market to immigrants, less educated people, low-income folks, people of color. And I'll start by just prefacing with the generic statement that research is hard. If we see, for example, a co-op paying low wages, it could be that it's paying low wages and that's a problem. It could be that it's actually paying high wages. It's just a low-wage sector. It could be that it's paying high wages. This is a worker with such disadvantages, they would normally earn even less. So you've all heard correlation is not causality, and that's going to be a big problem in the literature review as well as in our own studies, right? These aren't experiments. With those cautions in mind, it's quite clear in a lot of different settings that employee-owned enterprises have more stable jobs, particularly during recessions. More recently in the COVID pandemic, employee owners are less likely to be laid off. There's a robust result I'm not quite as confident in, that pay is not lower at ESOPs and employee stock ownership plans. Workers are receiving some stock, so they are accumulating wealth. That's not as clear for co-ops. And then, as I said, the ESOPs build wealth. That seems pretty clear. And again, it's not as clear for co-ops because people don't usually get tradable shares. When we turn to outcomes for employers, the counterpart is unsurprising, that employee-owned firms tend to last longer than traditional firms. A lot of studies find higher productivity. That's not always true. So there's a lot we don't know. And we don't know much about results for traditionally low-wage sectors in this statistical literature. Most of the statistical studies are just looking on average. There are a few, some of the wealth accumulation ones, for example, do break down for disadvantaged people and do find big wealth effects for ESOPs. We're hoping we will have time and resources to look at the case study literature. There are a lot more case studies of low-wage co-ops, co-ops in low-wage sectors. Again, they don't usually have a comparison group at all, so we would have to do a lot of work to see if we can say anything about what happens to wages, working conditions. There isn't much evidence on a bunch of important outcomes. Particularly in low-wage sectors, people often get treated very poorly at a very interpersonal level, being yelled at by customers, by bosses, by peers, sexually harassed for their accent, for their race, and so forth. And we don't have a lot of statistics on this. We're still going to see what we can get out of the case study literature, where there are some important examples of ownership having a correlation, but we're not sure how much we can generalize from the case studies. We're still thinking about that. So again, everything I tell you will be different when we've turned on our final report, but this is what our summary of the literature right now. The state asked us to look at what should standards be for high road worker co-ops. We thought about inventing our own standards, but basically the U.S. Departments of Labor and Commerce have a perfectly sensible list of what they think a good job is. They didn't write it exactly as I would have, but I'm not going to argue with them. I thought it's a good list. You've all seen standards like this. You know, they're not discriminating recruitment. The pay is good. Benefits are good. And the workers are empowered and treated with respect. These things all make sense. For a policy point of view, it's kind of a challenge because I put in bold some of the things we know how to measure: wages, benefits, something about injury rates. But a lot of really important things are not very easy to measure. And so I've spent a lot of my career measuring employee empowerment and decision-making and democracy at work. We know how to measure at the strategic level. Is there one person, one vote for board members, for example? How many board members do workers elect? But we care a lot about, in day-to-day life, is there democracy or autonomy or participation at the shop floor level, at this intermediate level, safety committees, grievance procedures? And those are just a lot harder to measure. So it's easy to sort of take a list. And again, I thought the U.S. Departments of Labor and Commerce did a fine job. But for policy, we want to know, well, which can we measure? And that's something I've been thinking about and failing to find simple answers for a long time. Because this is book length, I'll skip a few slides. Those are sort of background pieces. When we think about our research, we're doing a lot of qualitative research with case studies and some mini cases, and we're doing some statistics and key informed interviews. So again, this is a snapshot, just where we are, you know, as of a few days ago. One of our research methods is a paired case study. So this is a employee-owned home care cooperative that sends, I'm sorry, it's a cooperative labor contractor for home care workers, and a matched family-owned contractor for home care. The enterprises are growing in the same population of these immigrant Filipina workers. The comparison firm was chosen not to be representative, but to be another firm trying to be providing decent jobs and obey the law. And as we'll talk about, that is not universal in this sector. I'll just give a couple of sample results. We've learned a lot more, but I just wanted to give you a taste. The little co-op, these are both small organizations, has gotten a lot of support from various parts of its network. So it's gotten grants from the state and from foundations, technical assistance, and then it's returning the favor, and it's been part of networks that are part of advocacy and teaching others. The traditional family-owned small business has gotten a little bit of public training, but much less support from networks. The second result that to share is that, as you know, the home care sector is a lot of immigrants. A lot of these jobs, as I mentioned, they're not obeying all the rules, would be a polite way of saying it, but there's a lot of informal work just paid cash, and even if it's a little more formal, a lot of rules are not being obeyed with overtime and so forth. The workers in this community know about co-ops from the Philippines, a lot of them, and they're really interested in it. And there are other cooperatives with immigrants from different regions, not just the Philippines. So it seems an interesting opportunity, because immigrant workers are often some of the least advantaged, and the fact that they care about co-ops is a nice fit. As I mentioned, both firms find it hard to compete against folks who don't pay all the legally mandated wages and benefits. This is particularly hard because these agencies are contracting with the clients. They're not the clients or their long-term healthcare insurance are paying for it, which means there's not a lot of ability to pay there. For the co-op specifically, starting 200 years ago, the vision of co-ops was to create these communities, cohesive, democratic groups. And that's really hard because contract labor is fundamentally dispersed, that everybody's in a different frail person's home. It's hard to create that solidarity and democracy. It's hard even to have a meeting on Zoom because some people are working the evening shift. So it's an interesting case study. Workers have a lot of autonomy. They don't have a boss looking over their shoulder, but democracy at a broader level is a bit of a challenge. Our second case study, intended pair, is in road construction. I'll use the word we. This part is led by Mackenzie Scott at MIT Sloan School. And she's done most of her interviews at the employee-owned ESOP, as well as spending weeks, observing work, visiting meetings, strategic planning, and so forth. But we have not yet identified a comparison employer, so this may not end up being a paired case study. There's still a lot to learn from the ESOP, which is a very interesting workplace, much more than we expected. The ESOP is really committed to the employees in the sense of trying to get them from high school graduates who are potentially highly skilled workers at their jobs to becoming generalists who can manage an organization. And so they found lots of ways to sort of build these skills to go from worker to supervisor to manager. And a lot of that training has been to understand their roles as owners and co-owners of the firm. And so, again, we don't have a match, but there's a real sense there's a lot more autonomy than in a lot of its peers. Those comparative statements one has to be careful of since we don't have data on it, but that's our impression. The panel emphasized in our last meeting how important it was to learn from co-op conversions, and we did two of what I call mini cases of conversions. What I mean by mini cases, we don't have as many interviews with workers, so these are more of a high-level story, and we don't have a comparison. So these are just trying to help us understand the barriers to conversion, what makes it work better, and to see how is there a role for state policy to facilitate this process. The first conversion we looked at was a bakery. There was a successful bakery. The owner was getting worn out and she wanted to sell it, and she wanted the workers who had built the business with her to benefit. She sold it at a bit under market value, and as with everything else, the data analysis is ongoing. A couple of quick insights. The workers that we've spoken to, and again, it's a more limited set, really appreciate the conversion. And even though it's only been a few years, there's a strong ownership culture. It started with 10 employee owners. It's now up to 25. And the store revenue more than tripled. So there's really about as exciting of results as one could hope for in this one case study. We've also examined a conversion. Again, when I say we, this is Ninsun on our team has led these, a conversion to an employee-owned trust. And I've been thinking about co-ops and ESOPs for a long time. These trusts are new to me. And a trust is different than an ESOP or co-op because the employees don't own it. And what that means is that the board of the trust is supposed to pay attention to the employees, but also whatever else is in the trust's charter. And in this one, it's a lot is on the current and future potential employees. So what that means is a trust is probably, the incentives are not about maximizing employees' income or wealth for the current employees compared to a co-op or ESOP. But conversely, more than a co-op or ESOP, it's going to be better at focusing on future employees. And this particular trust is trying to serve and create a labor market entry for those with who have a hard time entering the labor market, folks like those recently out of prison. And it's a sort of subtle point, but if you're focused on your current employees, that's different from saying, well, of course we care about our current employees, but we want to be set up in 5 months and 5 years and 5 decades to still be creating these entry-level positions for those who have trouble finding them. It's quite a subtle but important difference. Now, trust in practice, the nonprofit boards don't always follow the mission exactly and so forth. But this one, it seems to be quite serious about helping folks who have, on average, a tough time in the labor market get started. The board also emphasized the importance of looking at labor contractors, and we did a couple of mini case studies of 2 of them. Again, we're still collecting data. And again, when I say a mini case, there's no comparison. There's limited employee so far none, but limited employee interviews. So again, we're looking at a different trust that's a contractor for farm workers, and then a worker-owned cooperative of healthcare contractors, allied healthcare, which is a annoying term meaning not doctors and nurses, but lots of other occupations. The farm worker contractor, again, is this trust. It's set up so the employee contractors, after they work for a while, will join the trust, sort of like being a member of a co-op, and vote for its board. That hasn't worked out in practice. That so far they have not been able to get the workers on the board. A big part of it is that, as you all know, the farm workers are very often immigrants in this country, and so far most of their employees have been temporary work permits who cannot become owners. The other interesting thing about this contractor is it started with one big farm as a client and really a partner, and it's had a hard time growing its client base. I should have spoken briefly. In what economists call a two-sided market, for these intermediaries, it works best if you have a lot of buyers and a lot of sellers. That if you want to sell something, you probably think about eBay because you know there'll be lots of buyers. And if you want to buy something, you might think about eBay because you know there are lots of sellers. And the same thing holds for ride sharing, Uber and Lyft. And for contractors, that your clients want a contracting agency that's likely to have lots of employees to fill openings. And employees want to go to a contractor that has lots of clients, so they're likely to be able to get work. So that the challenge is that there's a real economy of scale. It's hard to get started. The famous chicken and egg problem. Why would you have thousands of workers unless you have, thousands of jobs in your clients offering? And why would clients offer thousands of jobs unless you have thousands of workers? So it's a real challenge. The farm workers have found the healthcare contractor, allied health occupations, they've been up and running for a few years, but they still don't, as best I can tell, have 20 employee owners. So it's still very small. And one challenge they've faced is, in some sense, the challenge of success. Some people who are taking temporary contract jobs would be delighted to have a full-time job. So if you are a client at a hospital or nursing home or whatever, and they offer you a full-time job, you take it. For the worker, that's fantastic, but it really is a challenge if you're trying to build a community of hundreds, ideally thousands of employee owners who work for this contractor. So it's a challenge here, and I think would be in lots of other cooperative labor contractors. As I said, for the home care cooperative, both of these had a lot of partners involved in funding and supporting their startup. I think some early insights from both of them, and again, these are very tentative. This is just a snapshot. It's really hard to grow if you're paying above market compensation. I say pay, but compensation, pay, and benefits and everything. There's a lot of other contractors offering farm workers or allied health services, even though these are markets with a lot of shortages. There's still competition, and it's hard. Both of these many cases had some big clients to start. The farm I mentioned, Kaiser, for the healthcare. But that's great to get started. That doesn't create a whole business. Government support along with donors is obviously helpful, and COVID related funding helped one of these contractors. But fortunately, the pandemic ended, and that's then a challenge to create financially sustainable businesses. I know I never talk this much in a row, but I just feel we'll give this a try. Maria, please.
I'm happy to give you a break and just to ask a question. But appreciate this, because I think we're still in the early stages of gathering data through interviews, right? Because it's just a handful at this point.
I mean,
is what I'm gathering, right?
The many cases will have fewer interviews and will depend.
Okay.
So the majority of cases and case studies still have some interviews pending, but we've completed the majority of interviews we're going to do.
Okay. And then my question.
I'm sorry, let me just say one more thing.
Oh.
We have not completed the analysis.
Okay.
Right. So some of the interviews are not yet transcribed, or if they're transcribed, they haven't been, coded and so forth. So we have lots more to learn.
And I guess, just on that last point that you mentioned, and I think it might even be on this slide here about the limits on growth, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because I think like I would imagine we're trying to find what is the right model where there's both, right? There's that employee ownership component, but you need a growing organization, right?
Mm-hmm.
To sustain over time. So I think that's kind of part of what you're trying to understand as well, right?
Absolutely. And we'll come back to saying,
because
if
it's not economically, I guess where I'm going is if it's not economically sustainable, why would someone do it, type of thing. So trying to find like what is that space, that sweet spot where it is sustainable and
absolutely
right. Okay. All right. So I'm thinking of that.
The whole goal is to say we know how to grow market share, which is pay sub-minimum wages with people who can't complain. That's not really a solution we're looking for. We know how to pay high wages, just have an enormous wage and no clients. How we get both is really hard. And I'll talk more about what's hard and ways forward.
Thank you.
As I mentioned, the employee ownership trust is a trust which is probably a better fit than a co-op, or because the temporary work visa means that there will be higher turnover than ideal. But the temporary work visa problem is so severe, they can't even be good employee-owned trust in the sense of having any employee representation on the board. I think they soon will, but I'm just saying it's really a tough challenge. We also spoke to some experts in the field to understand, what networks already exist and to get their thoughts on barriers and policies. We are partway through the interviews, as I mentioned in the last answer. We haven't completed them. One subset are experts on worker ownership and high road employment and policies. The majority of them are experts on cooperative labor contractors and association of co-ops to help us understand this association of labor contractors, cooperative labor contractors we're thinking about. I'll skip that. I'll just say what comes through clear is that it's when you need economies of scale, that's really tough, and that's true in these two-sided markets. Some employee-owned workplaces have achieved economies of scale, not in labor contracting so much. I'll talk about one exception in a minute, but there's a vertically integrated set of co-ops in Colorado on solar energy. Mondragon is by far the most famous conglomerate in the Basque part of Spain. So there do exist these cases, but we don't see them really flourishing in labor contracting, and again, with this one exception. The last piece of research I'm going to talk about is statistical analysis. What we'd like to know is the effects of ownership on employees and particularly on disadvantaged employees. As usual, these are just correlations, so at our best, we won't get to the questions perfectly. The General Social Survey is a household survey of a representative sample of the country, and 3 years they asked specifically on employee ownership. The Rutgers Employee Ownership Center did a survey of ESOP employees and then a matched online survey of people on Amazon's Mechanical Turk who fill out surveys for money. Others have found Amazon as a reasonably representative sample, but obviously it's younger people who are comfortable using the internet and so forth. I talked briefly about some of the statistical issues, but there are tons of potential control variables, age and education, and all the employee demographics and characteristics we measure, lots of employer characteristics, size, number of employees at this workplace and the company and union and region. We'll be using a machine learning method to sort through those and find which controls we should use. We have lots of different outcomes, so we'll be adjusting for that. Because we're doing some of this hard statistics, we don't have any results today directly addressing our question, but we have been working hard with the data, and I'll show you a little bit about the data set. The first result, when we met last time, there was a very reasonable request to say, well, how do results differ by subgroups such as African Americans or whatever? And these surveys just don't have very many of any particular subgroup. So if we look at the General Social Survey, it's thousands of people, but if you're looking at private sector employees with companies of more than 10 employees or something, even pooling 3 waves, you're down to under 1,000 employees, and a bit less than 10% of them work for an ESOP. But if we look for African American or Hispanic, we get really very small samples, and I just can't look at results with 10 people. If we pool all of them, I guess it's 36. That's sort of like the smallest. I guess maybe we'll publish that. I'll have to think about it. The Rutgers survey has a lot more ESOP employees because it's they have 800 of them because it's an ESOP survey, but it's only at 8 ESOPs that were not randomly chosen. They wanted to participate with the Rutgers survey. So it's we do have more disadvantage, particularly if we look at, you know, the bottom third of the earnings distribution, but still not many people of color and not a ton of employers. So all of which is to say, these are the best data sets we could find, and the samples just aren't as big as we would like. With that said, I can show you a couple of crosstabs to say the sort of outcomes we're looking at. These crosstabs are not, you know, they don't answer any particular question. I'm just showing you that we have the data, basically. We're not controlling for age or education, or is this a big or a small company? And I'll put some statistical significance tests, but those are completely oversimplified. They don't adjust for all the things we should. But if you look at the general social survey, you can see that there aren't enormous differences on most measures. The big one is decision making, where the ESOP sample is noticeably higher. And you know, most things just aren't that big a difference, you know. But I just want to stress these. I'm just showing these to you so you know that we have the data, not that you should pay attention to these numbers, because they're just, this could all be dominated by the fact that ESOP workers are older or more educated or younger or less educated. I have no idea. We haven't looked at that yet. The Rutgers sample, as I said, we have a larger number of people with low incomes. So if we look just at the low income sample, again, a lot of results aren't very different, but they do seem more satisfied than the non-ESOP, this Mechanical Turk sample. But again, they're less likely to look for a new job, but the Mechanical Turk is specifically people who fill out surveys online for money. And those kind of make sense. Those might be people who don't love their current job. So it's, we will do our best to get as close to a causal statement as we can, but all the results will be much more convincing than these, but still only suggestive. After we do all that research, we're going to tell you, you know, sort of summarize it based on the literature and what we've learned, some of the barriers. So far, we've seen pretty familiar barriers. You know, the employers and who could convert aren't very familiar. The employees don't know how to read a financial statement. How could they? We don't teach that in high schools. Capital constraints, it's hard for any small business, but definitely for these unusual ones to borrow and so forth. We'll talk about some of the facilitators. The one I've mentioned is enforcing labor laws, so you're not competing against these folks who don't pay mandated wages and such, and the role of networks and so forth. Again, we haven't gotten very far on policies. You know, we're just not there yet. As I mentioned last time, the principles we're looking at are there policies that target specific market or government failures, as well as those that are cost effective. I've talked a lot about economies of scale in businesses, but there's also economies of scale in policy. If we need training materials and we create them once, maybe translate them to a few languages, but then thousands of, tens of thousands, 100,000 workers at hundreds of employers can use them, that's very often going to be more cost effective than something where each enterprise you have to write a check to it, or each month you subsidize it. So we're looking for opportunities that are likely to be cost effective. An example, and I am not convinced this will be a policy we'll end up converting at the endorsing at the end. as I said, I'd heard of ESOPs, but I can never remember the difference between an S corp and a C corp and the ESOP, which, and employee ownership trusts I hadn't even heard of when I started this. That they're relatively new. So if you're a successful business person running a chain of stores, how would you possibly know that these things exist and they're appropriate for you? And what's the startup costs or the tax benefits of ESOP or co-op conversion? One could imagine feeding all of this information into a version of a GPT and create, chat employee ownership that a small business person could go to and answer a few questions. And based on those questions, the artificial intelligence would ask a few more questions, and it could create a spreadsheet showing the financial and other implications of various options. So again, I'm not claiming this policy will end up endorsing, but it's the sort of thing you build it once and many businesses can use it. So it might end up being cost effective. Our policy analysis section will spend a long time looking at the Alliance of Contractor Co-ops and Alliance of Contractors for Labor, Cooperative Labor Contractors. And you could think of this as having two dimensions. One part is the alliance part. This is a confederation of co-ops achieving common technology, branding, economies of scale, and buying insurance and things. That's one pillar. And the second pillar is this is specifically, I talked about a solar network in Colorado or a Mondragon conglomerate in the Basque Country. This is an alliance confederation of labor contracting co-ops, where these contractors are acting as intermediaries, recruiting clients, employers, and recruiting and vetting employees and then matching them. When we think about what we know from the literature, there's pretty solid evidence that worker-owned workplaces can gain from cooperating with each other to help workers. When we look at the labor contracting, what comes through is it's really hard to reach scale. And as promised, I'll tell you about the one exception. In New York City, there's home care that has achieved scale. It has 2,000 employees, which, as best I understand it, is by far the largest co-op in the US. So that's really exciting, right? That really is a meaningful scale for a co-op. But it's also a bit of a warning. These are really not high-paying jobs, and they have not addressed that, right? There's not so much waste and surplus floating around that you just make it worker-owned and all of a sudden you get to raise wages or improve benefits a lot. As best we understand, these are better jobs. The workers are treated better, and appreciate the respect and autonomy and dignity. But these started as low-wage jobs and they still are. So that's a exciting and cautionary tale. Other co-ops of contractors, the drivers cooperatives in the same sense, tried to use a digital app. Tried to secure market share against the digital app folks, Uber and Lyft. And, they're in business, but they have not really achieved scale. In Washington State, our team member Adria has done study of this. Again, it's really hard to get to scale. But they have been helping each other, and they have been flourishing, not flourishing. They have been doing okay. And then, as I said, in California, the healthcare and the farm worker contractors just show it's really hard. when we think about this sector, it's important to think that temp workers, contractors, it's really heterogeneous. That some folks have tried to say, we're just going to be back office support. You're an independent contractor, you find your own clients, and the co-op is just going to support you. That's very different from the examples I've been talking about, which are staffing firms where they find both sides, the clients and the workers. And then that's different yet again from these app-based, I'm going to create a platform where the workers and the clients can find each other. So just saying, it's a complicated market. The California proposal is focused on this middle one of staffing firms, but the other two are things to think about. And the other thing is about the sector, there's just this real tension. Shit. I'm sorry. I hope you didn't hear me say a bad word, but my screen went dark for a minute. Let me see if I can go back to that. To the extent we're trying to create good jobs, that's a whole lot easier if it's already a relatively high wage sector where there's shortages of workers, and it's a lot harder if you're trying to serve folks who the labor market traditionally hasn't treated very well. And so that's a real tension, that it's probably easier to grow any sort of co-op, but definitely a high road contracting co-op in sectors with workers that companies are willing to pay a lot to. But if we're thinking about home care and farm workers, those are the workers with some of the lousiest jobs in the state, and it's just gonna be a lot harder to raise wages in places without clients willing to pay very much. The second lesson across these several mini cases and our reading of the literature is just how hard it is to run a worker-owned labor cooperative. That fundamentally a two-sided market means you have to be an expert in this sector. You have to know people at the hospitals or at the farms who might hire your healthcare workers or your farmers. You have to be out there, in an entrepreneurial spirit, drumming up new business. You also have to be excellent at running a worker-owned business, which is its own set of skills. Management is hard. Management in a democratic workplace is probably harder still. So it's this is maybe an obvious statement, but this is a problem that lots of these contractors have had, that we're just asking a lot of these managers to be excellent at both the client side and the worker side. So coming back to the question asked earlier, well, is there some way to create financial sustainability given these challenges? You can rephrase a lot of that question is, why would clients for worker-owned labor contractors be willing to pay a little bit more, especially in low-wage sectors? And the pay might be for better benefits, or it might be for higher base pay or profit sharing, whatever. In the California proposal, there was the sensible idea that we're going to clarify the law. That in California, if you hire a contractor, there's the client can always worry that they're going to end up being told, no, you really are the employer who has legal liability for taxes or whatever else this person did. So it's nice to have clarity of the law. I don't think, as best I can tell, that's an enormous incentive. It would be great if we could raise demand with higher productivity. So in contracting, part of that is just having a great app that clients want to know what contractors are available with what skills and experience. the employee owners want to know what jobs are available, how to get there, what duties will be asked of them, and so forth. If there were higher skills or better certification for skills, that might help. Am I going blank when my screen goes blank? I don't know what's happening. I don't know. Employee ownership, there's some evidence can increase motivation, and if clients see that and value that, that might raise ability to pay. In some sectors, and again, home care is an important example, clients really care about low turnover, that if I'm getting care for my aunt in the 90s, I like it if it's the same people the same people every Wednesday or whatever. So so these are things that labor contractors can think about. Again, it's really tricky because as I mentioned, lower turnover is threatened by the fact that sometimes your staff get hired away full time by your client. And again, there's this chicken and egg problem. If you're a small labor contractor, you can't always offer work. It means your contractors probably are looking at other labor contractors to get jobs. So again, if you're big enough that you can almost always give work, that'll be less of a problem, but not many cooperative labor contractors have hit that scale. In low-wage sectors, I emphasize this is going to be even harder. That the California proposal said we're going to pay above the mandated minimum wage and even more in compensation with decent benefits. Of course, I would like everybody to have better wages and benefits, but that for reasons unclear to me, but my wife assures me are very good reasons, I don't run the world. So what I want doesn't matter, which means either, as the New York Home Care Cooperative did, you accept the low compensation, maybe you find a way to raise productivity, or you can find niches willing to pay above market wages. But fundamentally, if we want something to grow to scale, it means focusing a lot on this productivity element, which is hard, right? If it's easy, somebody would have done it. We're still doing our research. We don't know all the evidence gaps. I mean, we know a bunch of them. Happily, there's going to be a little more compensation data coming in a few weeks. As I've emphasized, there's clearly a lack of data how ownership affects disadvantaged employees. You know, the existing data sets we're looking at are ESOPs. They're not all majority owned ESOPs, and they're surely not co-ops. We're going to summarize the best data we have on the various barriers, market and government failures, and others, but there's a lot more we won't know, and we'll have a lot more elaboration and clarity on the gaps in the literature. And then finally, we're going to talk about the learning agenda, how we can build in learning in what we're doing to promote ownership, and some of those lessons may provide to other workplace policies. So I don't know how else to emphasize. I've used the word preliminary and snapshot and in progress over and over again, but I can't help but including with that statement. So when I teach, it's always very interactive and participatory. That's not how this went, but my goal is to learn from you guys as well as to clarify the intermediate amount we've learned now. So please fire away.
I think we should open it up for questions. Any number questions?
And
I think sorry,
please,
I'll ask a question. I think the question that was in my mind as I was hearing your presentation was about the viability of an organization that from a co-op perspective. Like I'm most familiar with the ESOP model, which just seems like to be almost automatic in some cases. So it's like it seems easy, like you're building and growing in organizations and there's that added benefit. Some of the items that you shared and that you described seem like it'd be a bit of a challenge to the extent in certain sectors where like achieving that balance might be a challenge. Is my gut takeaway, but that's just from what I'm hearing thus far. No real deep dive on my end.
I mean, as you know very well, starting new business is hard. So starting a new employee-owned business there's no magic wand. It's still going to be hard. And in some sectors, and in this contracting setting, it may be especially exciting if it works, and also especially hard. And we'll be outlining, what we learn about the upsides and the concerns. But I didn't really say anything new there. Are we agreeing, or did you have a question or point I'm missing?
I'm just acknowledging sort of the taking in that information and the various considerations, I think, to make, right? Thinking about.
One of the things that comes to mind for me, Dr. Levine, is you talked about folks that have a successful business and want to transition out. And of course, as somebody that's an advocate for small businesses, I have great concern about the loss of jobs to a community when a family-run business closes, and the loss to the jobs, the loss of the institution in the community. And so I'd be real interested in, is there a way that we could create, is there a pathway for workers to own those business when they're getting ready to close? And is there a way that we could almost systematize or, buy a business in a box? I know that's super simple, but it's a growing problem, and we've got to do something, I think, to save older businesses and institutions, particularly when there are family members that don't want to take it over. And how do we save those jobs? So be interested in any pathways that you uncover in the research that could potentially help solve that problem.
So business in a box, meaning if we just had a standard set of templates for the transaction to move you from family-owned bakery to employee-owned bakery. I mean, again, right now we have a menu of policy ideas. We're not ranking them yet, but one of them is, can we have more templates that I don't know if any of you are lawyers, but lawyers are expensive. I appreciate when they keep me out of jail, but the more we can automate this with either a handful of standard templates or artificial intelligence that makes this process easier. Those are things we're considering and looking into, talking to experts in the field and practitioners to see what role they envision in playing. But right now, selling to an ESOP costs, hundreds of thousands of dollars probably in months of your life. Co-op conversions cost less, but they're really hard work, or a trust, it costs less. They're fundamentally just basically hard work. Banks think they're weird, just writing up a loan contract is hard. So thinking about how close we can get to, I love your phrase, the business in the box. You have a bakery, take this set of paperwork, sign here, and now it's employee owned. That'll cost you $50. That'll be a long ways away, but it's a wonderful vision to think about. That's what we should be headed for.
No, thank you for that. I really appreciate, you even vision casting with me on that, frankly. Because, one of the things that we know from our work is exactly what you said, the legal expenses, the financial expenses, getting those experts to help put a deal together. It's out of reach for most folks, especially the population that we're talking about, trying to help here with this project. So thank you.
But co-op conversion in a box, it's a good line. We'll put that down.
Like it. Member Grisatello, you didn't step up for any questions. I don't want us to hog the floor from you.
Yeah, no questions. I was just going to reflect that this is really wonderful and a huge scope and amount of work. And I also just particularly appreciate the inclusion of the like considering what incentives for this particular model, like the association model, that the stuff you touched on at the end around a networked association and what the joint employment liability stuff, and just like what if there's a way to like all of it. It makes me curious, like how or if you all will be able to quantify some of these things as opposed to narratively discuss their value, but both are valuable. But yeah, so anyway, I just appreciate the inclusion of that, like specifics of the model.
Yeah, and let me just say, I'm presenting here and I just flashed the names of everyone who did all the work, but they did all the interview. I did 2 interviews. They did 98% of the work and the data work. So this really is an impressive team project for which I get to be the figurehead. But to state the obvious, you guys gave us a very short timetable. We're not going to answer every question we would like. We strongly endorse you extending the contract with your infinite state resources, because we think that I flashed up that there will be a section on unanswered questions. It will be, there are a lot of them. Everyone on the team is collecting the claims that they wish they could make or claim to be true or false, that we just don't have the data and qualitative evidence to support. So we will have an agenda, I promise you. The flip side of that, Ray, is we will not have quantitative metrics for everything we would like to measure.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Do we have anything else on the report out from Dr. Levine before we move to the next item? Okay. Dr. Levine, thank you again for that presentation, and excited to see the final results. So, and learn more. All right, so our next agenda item is our next agenda. So this is the opportunity for us to request any agenda items for future panel meetings. So any ideas, thoughts? Okay. Hearing none. Next agenda item, number 7, public comment on non-agenda items. And Jillian, do we have any public comment? Do we know?
It does not look like anyone from the public is here. It's just all people from our teams. So, so I think we are probably good there.
Okay, and no suggestions for the next agenda, no public comment. That brings us to item number 8. And that means this meeting is adjourned.
Thank you all so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Really
you,
appreciate it.
everyone. Thank you.
Tara,
Thank you.
Tara, can you stay on for 1 minute as an expert, not as a panel member?
Sure.
Thank you,
Bye,
Ray.
Ray.
Oh, I think it might close the meeting when I leave.
Oh, okay. Dr. Levine, my telephone, are we still recording? Here, let me,
Can
I'll
you
send an
stop
email
first?
to you both and connect you right now.
perfect.
Thank you very much.
Okay, yeah, no problem.
Perfect. All right.
Bye.